I'm very glad to present panel, предоставить панель Катарине От, наш
to Katarina Ott, to our long-term partner since the Strategy Center times with the projects now. And right now, she's the director of the Institute of Public Finance from Croatia. So please, the floor is yours.
You can switch on microphone.
You will need to switch on your microphone.
In panel, in the top, bottom and left.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you now hear me.
Yeah,
okay, thank you. I'm Katarina Ott from the Institute of Public Finance. There I'm a researcher and I'm also a professor at the Faculty of Mathematics, University of Zagreb. In both these capacities, I've been researching government accountability, fiscal budget transparency, and public participation for ages. As the member of the United Nations Committee of Experts on Public Administration, I've been interested in Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG 16 on building strong institutions, because building strong institutions is that we are actually speaking these days. I'm also very grateful to Croatian Science Foundation, which regularly funds projects on local government budget transparency in Croatia and Slovenia, and the impacts of this local government budget transparency. This COVID pandemic and its consequences only emphasized my interest and my activities. In this context, for us, budget transparency means providing an insight into complete, accurate, timely, and understandable budget information. For us, it means essential prerequisite for public participation and a key element of good governance.
Presentations, demonstration of screen.
No.
Green panel in the bottom.
No, I don't have a presentation. Today, I'm just going to speak. Now, in the times of budget pandemics, of these pandemics of COVID, the transparency is more important than ever. And extraordinary circumstances we are witnessing now can't be an excuse for the lack of transparency. Government decisions, they affect efficiency, equity of revenue and expenditure, and consequently the well-being of citizens, particularly of the marginalized and excluded ones. For governments, pandemic means decreased revenue and increased expenditure, but for citizens, it might mean life or death, drastic changes in access to health, jobs, education, welfare, security, etc. Governments are undertaking various pandemic-related measures, direct transfers, tax expenditures, etc., at national, subnational, and international levels. Globally, amounts are enormous. By the way, there is an excellent tracker of government responses at the website of International Monetary Fund, and I'm recommending everybody to check it. How will all these funds be spent? Who will benefit? Who will bear the costs? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves. With the support of the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency and International Budget Project, Institute of Public Finance has been trying to support Croatian Ministry of Finance to transparently publish the COVID responses and recovery-related data. What we noticed that works well in Croatia are the online, detailed explanations of most emergency measures, quick application for tax reliefs and job preservation measures online, and online release of beneficiaries of these measures. What would we recommend to everybody is to use these gifts fiscal data for emergency response guide and gives support in this matter. You met Aura yesterday. She's from GIFT, but all colleagues there are always extremely cooperative and full of good ideas. So my suggestion would be to everybody to identify, consolidate, and publish data required to achieve. Sorry? Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you very well.
Okay, I'm sorry, there was some kind of interruption. Okay, I would suggest to everybody to identify, consolidate, and publish data required to achieve greater transparency of emergency responses, for example, on tax relief measures, on tax deferrals, etc. Then what is also important is to provide relevant, timely, and understandable data and target data for different uses. You can't have the same display of data. You have to target it for media, for members of parliaments, for NGOs, because each of them requires different kind of data. And develop one central place for disclosing all fiscal info related to COVID. Only the full disclosure could enable public participation and scrutiny over this extraordinary, but also over all budgetary funds. Unfortunately, majority of countries still have insufficient budget data overall, even in normal times, not only in pandemic. As Tatiana nicely presented yesterday, according to OBS, 3/4 of world population can't appropriately access the overall budget information. Particularly worrying generally, and particularly worrying now in pandemic, is that 70% of countries is not presenting expenditure by gender, age, income, where necessary by religion, to illustrate impacts of policies on different groups of citizens, nor the differences between enacted funds for policies intended to benefit the most impoverished and the outcomes of these policies. For example, 85% is not presenting information on tax expenditure, tax exemptions, preferences, etc., for entities, individuals, activities with statement of purpose or reason, nor listing beneficiaries and estimates of the foregone revenue. These are the facts. However, with political will, overall budget transparency could be rapidly improved. We have examples of Guatemala, Indonesia, Kyrgyz Republic, Ukraine, etc. There are countries like Bangladesh, UK, South Africa, Pakistan, particularly transparent regarding, for example, redistribution by gender, by households, by incomes, giving detailed breakdowns of pro-poor expenditures, policy priorities, expected outputs, estimates of past and future spending for poverty alleviation, financial and performance information of anti-poverty schemes. A good example is a well-being budget in New Zealand. Visit a well-being budget, it's very interesting. Our Institute of Public Finance, could also offer numerous suggestions, as we have been measuring and analyzing whether all Croatian local governments are regularly publishing key budget documents. Thanks to our constant annual rankings of local governments and ensuring competition among local governments, we are witnessing unbelievable improvements in average local government budget transparency. However, we still have huge differences among our local governments, particularly because bigger and richer ones are much more transparent than the poorer and smaller ones. And we in Croatia have numerous small and poor local governments. Actually, we have almost 600 local governments on around 4 million population. It means that we desperately need a reform, but we are far from such steps in the country. Of course, sheer publication of budget documents doesn't in itself guarantee absolute transparency, but it should be both prescribed and encouraged as an effort toward higher transparency levels necessary for public participation and scrutiny over the usage of public funds and the impact and outcomes of policies intended to benefit the most impoverished, excluded, or marginalized. Despite the globally insufficient average budget transparency, we have examples of countries striving to improve transparency. We have COVID-related guide made by GIFT. We just need national, subnational, and international political will for the full disclosure of budgetary data. All government budgetary decision, information, data should be fully transparent to all parts of government, of parliaments, of oversight institution, and of general public. We have some really pending issues. The most important open issue would be how to motivate executive to be more transparent even in normal times, and now particularly how to motivate legislative on all levels, national, subnational, to be more actively participate in budgetary processes, to demand from the executive to provide them with timely and understandable data and understandable narratives of these data, not just sheer tables. How to motivate media to educate themselves in budgetary topics so to be able to report the public. And finally, how to motivate citizens to use published data, because very often data are there, but there is no interest. So to summarize, we need immediate subnational, national, and international political will for full budgetary disclosure, particularly of measures and policies relevant for marginalized and excluded citizens. With these words, I would like to thank organizers, hoping that this gathering will be a step in that direction. Please feel free to visit the website of the Institute of Public Finance, where you will find a lot of budget transparency related topics. And you can contact me whenever you wish on our mail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katerina, especially for the economy of time. Итак, мы переходим к следующему.
And now we will move to our next presentation. And I'm happy to pass the floor to Meruert Mahmutova, to the director of the Center of Public Policy Research Center. And this is just the reference. Meruert is not only the director of this institute, but is also our longtime friend and partner. Meruert, you're here with us, and I am very happy to give you the floor. Hello, Alexander, and hello, esteemed colleagues. And I have prepared a number of slides for you, and if you will allow me to get access to screen sharing, screen sharing, the green button, if you can find it. Screen demonstration. Okay. Okay, we can see your presentation. Everything is good. Thank you very much for inviting me I've heard some very interesting presentations. Katarina, I'm very happy to see you. I first met you in 2001, and since then we meet each other regularly. And we see many people from different countries on these conferences, each working in their own countries and working on the transparency of budget and openness of budget data. And I have prepared a number of slides for you as the listeners to give you a general understanding of how the budget transparency is doing in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan has passed the first round in 2006, was part of the first round of the Budget Transparency Index in 2006. And we were discussing the questionnaire for a while, what questions are inside. And the first experience was published in 2006. Back then, Kazakhstan's index was 43%. And since then, we have seen a lot of change. And I'm going to show you the next slide with the latest evaluation of the Transparency Index of Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan has received 58 points on the latest one, and if it is to be compared with the regional striers, with Georgia, Russia, Kyrgyz Republic, they're all higher, and Mongolia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Tajikistan are a little below Kazakhstan's index. It seems that we do see progress, but generally there still are a lot of questions that require attention and that are still not resolved. If we are to look what has changed over this time, we've seen the beginning of the publication of the citizens' budgets, and as Katarina just noted, the participation of citizens in the budgeting process still remains very low, despite the fact that we have very active initiatives and we have various civil organizations that are trying to include the citizens in the discussion of budgeting processes. Despite the index improving, we see a worsening of the transparency of the budget in terms of their discussion in the parliament. Before, the parliament would discuss the budget in detail regarding every program in the parliament, but now this information has become less transparent. Now, apart from the budget that is being provided to the parliament, it does not have economic classification. We're still not seeing the publication, the data on the government debt, the percentage, the loans, the dates, and occasionally we still have questions towards this, especially when this becomes especially pressing due to certain changes. Overall, there are many initiatives from the civic society with studying separate directions of the budgeting. We even have the site called publicbudget.kz, and this site is supported by the donors. And here you can see interactively how the local budgets are being allocated. We have a great initiative in the city of Almaty, and yesterday I was listening to the presentation from the various Russian regions, St. Petersburg in particular, and how they're working with their participatory budgets. On the very beginning of 2019, in the budget, 500 million tenge was allocated for the citizens to be able to initiate the projects and the proposals that they would like to see that money spent on. They were picked, they were reviewed, and they could get the potentially be financed from the local governments. And 500 million tenge seems like a big sum, over $1 million, but comparing to the budget of the entire city, it is less than 1%. It's 0.6% from the entire budget of the city of Almaty. So we can see that it's fairly small. But even on such a scale, here we do see civic discussion, and they can get their views heard. Unfortunately, this is still not widespread and is not applied everywhere, but it is starting to see traction. Now we see the local transparency budget being supported in cash terms, but it's not as interesting because on an international level, usually we see the discussion of the open budget index, and an open budget index is the openness and transparency of government finance and fiscal policy in general. I'd like to note that based on the World Bank evaluation, where they are evaluating the transparency of government fiscal policies. We have received a low mark because they're noting the lack of transparency in the government finances. And I'm going to stop to talk about the details on this and what challenges go along with it. Unfortunately, we are using non-budgeting application of the funds and foundations. Our oil incomes are collected in the national fund, and we have cases where the national funds are being used for purchase of precious papers, and we see that we have the 100% owner being the government. And only in 2008 and 2016, over 17.2 billion US dollars have been used without attention to budgeting. In 2017, we've seen the rules of the use of this national fund that were meant to regulate how these funds are used, but we've got great rules being accepted and great rules being approved, but these rules are not accounted to, and people are not held responsible to these rules. And we see the issues with the various funds despite the existing rules. And of course, the use of the funds to finance government companies leads to systemic risk because the active financial, there is no transparent data on these purchases. And so how the companies use the money that they receive from the national funds is unknown. And so this leads to a lack of transparency. The companies don't publish reports, and even the limited information that they do publish is not reviewed in the parliament. And when the parliament is given the report on how the budget is being spent, this is not accompanied with the reports from government companies regarding how do they spend allocated money. Now, with the pandemic, we've seen an increase in interest into how the healthcare fund is being spent, and we've seen that here the healthcare company expenditures that belong to the government are still not being reviewed in the government, in the parliament, and they're not being presented together with the budget into the parliament. And I think that this provides us the further opportunity to increase the transparency. We have the quasi-fiscal expenditures of our government companies. They still raise a lot of questions because even the very nature of the expenditures and expenses, are they fiscal or where does this money go? We still don't fully know. And the ex-president of Kazakhstan has noted that the monetary expenditures that were done here were not budget means. But when we look at national companies and government companies, we see that the majority of expenditures are being financed from the government that were connected with the building of infrastructural projects and other projects in the city of Turkestan. And the providing of more detailed reports on behalf of the national companies to the parliament could significantly improve the transparency of the budget. For example, the evaluation of the government procurement, where we see the unification of various companies which are united by we see the government procurement being a standalone and the government company procurement being different, and they are carried out outside the government procurement, and they do not fall under the laws of and regulation of procurement. And according to the evaluation of the World Bank, we see 87% of expenditures being conducted on a non-competitive basis. So that's when there is just one offer and just one company carrying out. So this is an area where we are not yet seeing transparency at all. And when we're talking about procurement for government companies, unfortunately, from the side of these companies, we're not seeing the responses and we're not seeing answers to the questions that, for example, were posed by the World Bank. And here I would like to reach the recommendations. And of course, this is a very brief overview, because if we are to talk about the system of our government finance, we could spend an entire day talking about that. For over 12 years working in this area, of course, we do have a lot of analytical data. And if we are to just go into the recommendations are to do with the challenges that we are facing today. Of course, we need fiscal consolidation. We need to ban the non-budgeting expenditures. We need to stop the use of non-budget use of money from the national fund. And we need to make sure that it is upheld with the budget, because we need to make sure that the budgeting, and we see the budgeting being spent by President's direct order, and that is not a good thing. So we need to make sure we have openness in terms of these expenditures that are sent directly from up top. We also need to open up the information regarding the government debt and about the various obligations that the government undertakes on itself, because this information was provided in 2006 in a very condensed manner, and this problem still remains since 2006. And so the issue of debt control, it's still a pressing and current issue as of today. The government debt itself is not too large, but nevertheless, there are quasi-government companies. Well, the government calls them government companies, and they do belong to the government, and they get the access to the treasury. And we have various umbrella companies that fall under these companies. And if we are to get transparency on those, we will be able to have a more responsible allocation of budgeting funds and their execution. And of course, we are seeing the effect of low citizen involvement in the budgeting. We have a very renowned project, Solar Test. I think many of you have seen these huge columns being erected, but nevertheless, in the budgeting of 2021, for the completion of this project, we're seeing 10 billion tenge allocated to the construction of this project. And this tells us about the fact that, unfortunately, the government does not hear the outcry of the citizen, and that undertakes these highly responsible decisions without taking into account the need or the purpose of such decisions. And of course, I was very brief, and thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for the opportunity to tell you about the budgeting transparency of Kazakhstan. Thank you very much, Merardo. We have listened to the situation in Croatia and Kazakhstan, and we are in between, very close to what you're talking about. And I hope that you're going to participate in one of our working groups to prepare the conference for the next year. It's always a pleasure working with you. Tatiana, we have a question from Tatiana Vinogradova. Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I wrote in chat a question that I would like to ask Katarina Ott, but I would also be very interested in Miroert's answer to it as well. Now, in a number of various publications and works on the development of citizens' involvement and participation, Katarina also mentioned that we hear the necessity for political will as a concept that we keep hearing over and over again. This sounds like a mandatory condition for the government to be open to its citizen. And I have a question, and even I write in my own works that the political will is something that is needed, but I have a question. Can we pass through such legislation that would make this political will, how to put it, legislation that would be stronger than the presence of this political will? Okay, we understand the question. Who wants to answer first, Katarina? Or
okay. I don't think that it could be prescribed. Of course, the laws, the rules, the regulations are necessary, but even when you have all these laws, rules, regulations, you can't be sure that politicians will abide. We are all reading every day about corrupt politicians, uninterested politicians, etc. So probably the pressure from us, the citizens, the NGOs, the civil society organizations, for example, we are constantly producing citizen budget guides for the national level, for the city of Zagreb, and then the media is discussing about that, and it could maybe pressure them. And what we noticed, it is probably easier at the local government levels, subnational levels. For example, for last, I don't know, 6-7 years, we are each year checking all 600 local governments in Croatia, whether they are publishing executive budget proposal, enacted budget, citizen budget guide, end-year report, mid-year report. And then we give them scores. And so we have this open local budget index. And then we rank all these almost 600 local governments. And then, you know, the mayors of the cities, the heads of the counties, the heads of municipalities. And then we award each year. We have a huge event at which we give diplomas to those who published everything. And then they can put these diplomas on their websites. Then their local media interview them. Then national media, the TV comes and takes their photos. And then one mayor receives the diploma, is interviewed by the media, and then the neighboring mayor also wants to be seen on TV, to be praised and so on. And the competition among politicians became so big that in, let's say, 5 years, from one on average published one document, we reached on average published 4 documents on average for all local governments. So I think that making competition among politicians is probably the best way to incentivize them to be more open. Because
Спасибо, Катарина. Мы поняли. Это очень важно и интересно.
Thank you, Katarina. We understand this is a great experience that is very useful for you, Mirvert. What about your experience on the subject? I think this is a very interesting experience in Croatia, and I like this idea, but I would say that we need a legislation that could help, and it is to do with the transparency from the monitoring authorities. In Kazakhstan in 2005 for the first time has joined this initiative, and once per 2 years we're seeing the validation of this. And in order to implement the use of, for example, the raw resources, and all the extracting companies have to provide the reports on the EITI. So they have the correlating forms, and there is a certain level after which the companies can provide reports. And moreover, during the last round of the codex being accepted, they also said that the companies must provide the information about the final beneficiaries of the allocated funds. This is a very interesting experience in terms of progress. EITI reviews its standards from time to time. The standards require more and more information to be opened up. Kazakhstan has gone through this validation process 2 years ago. And overall, I would like to note the positive influence of this international initiative to information openness, because here it is being reviewed at the highest of levels, on the level of ministries, and it's also finds interest in the National Council. and the openness of information within the EITI, it was legally upheld as a condition, and they are trying to comply to this legislation. So in order to, for example, change the legislation, here we do require political will, because despite the initiative going from the grassroots level, from the civic society, we have been holding the very first conference on the ITI back in 2004, but still, the things that have been proposed back then, a lot of it has been implemented. And of course, political will is needed. Political will, it allows the legislative changes to go through. And when legislation is passed, the legislation is observed by all the actors. Very interesting. Political will and competition. One situation where we see the creation of the political competition and in Croatia and on an international level with the International Partnership Index. This is a great stimulus that provides incentive for politicians. And this competition is great, and being isolated in this situation is dangerous. That's my comment at the end. Okay, colleagues, thank you very much. We have looked at what is happening from two sides, on two sides of our country. Now, let's come back to our country. Now, Ivan Bektin, the director of Infocultura, the deputy of FKU with the audit chamber, and on the web it was written that he's the open data project manager, and the openness and transparency of government fiscal data as a government policy. Ivan Bektin, the floor is yours. Good morning, dear colleagues. I am currently leading the project that is to do with the open data within the audit chamber, and I am one of the deputies of one of the sub-directors. This is the last position that I can still remain in a public domain without going into full government service. Today, I would like to share the examples of government policy regarding opening the data on government finances, both in the world and in Russia. And I'd like to just draw a comparison between the two. And then to later dive into more details regarding more details of what's happening in Russia. My colleague will share the Russian details later, Olga Rakhmimovich. And now opening the data in terms of financing as government policy. Now, I'm going to make a caveat here that I specialize in working with data. This is my experience and this is my specialty. Despite me mentioning certain questions about the various other forms of information, I think and I work only with data, and everything else I perceive as something that can be transformed into data. Okay, so I guess we can start. In my understanding, and in my perception, the data on government finance are much broader than the data on budgeting or the contracts that we work with. These are the data that are opened up in Russia, that are opened up fairly widely, the knowledge about the budgets, the activities of the budget companies, various suppliers, various strategies, national projects, contracts, subsidies, grants, and so on and so forth. I just want to say that the range of this information is fairly broad. And if we are to talk about budgeting, about the income and expenditures of the government, then this is a fairly large topic. Not only at the level of how the government spends or earns its money, but in terms of how it plans to spend the money, what decisions are made. Do we see the appropriate normative documents? Do we see a connection of the money to the metrics that they're tied into? Do we have a connection between the people who give out the money, people who receive them? And do we have any tools to monitor this, videos, documents? So this is a very broad and very different process. And this is part of the audit chamber's activities. This is part of the civil society control. And this is part of the many projects that are currently happening around the world. Well, here I present a number of ways that data can be presented. The majority of the data is connected with government finance. This is not only to do in terms of what it is to do with the government data. It's all done in PDF, Excel, documents, even in very esteemed organizations, they're still presenting it in this manner. So for example, government banks, government corporations are first publishing everything nicely, and then all of a sudden you get scans of documents when they don't want somebody actually finding things out. This is a horrible practice. And I want to say that publishing entire documents, I always say that the biggest issue with this is, of course, security. Because a person who's publishing documents as scans, usually he can conceal information from privy eyes, and he can also risk opening up the various confidential data within those scans. We constantly monitor various government systems, and we periodically find in scan data passport details of people. And this is just a very low culture of how some government bodies work. It sometimes leads to very unfortunate consequences for them themselves. The presentations that are welcome in Russia and across the world are interactive websites, and we have a lot of them in Russia. And key to us and very important is the usability of data in machine reading formats, so JSON, XSV, and so on, the ones that allow us to fairly quickly go with complicated analytics. In some places, we see this as public research. In some places, we see this as municipal control. And in some other places, we see this in other forms of analytical work. And I'm just going to give two examples with what we work directly. These are contracts and subsidies. Up until very recently, the subsidies were published by the Ministry of Finance in very great detail. The contracts are still published until now, with certain limitations, of course. But both the information are fairly widely published in Russia. They're fairly widely open, at least the government contract data is. And this is measured in tens of millions of records. If we are to look at their entirety, then it's hundreds of millions of various records of contracts, protocols, documents that accompany it, with a general volume of over 1.5 petabytes, which are stored in the government. I can't even say how much exactly, but it's constantly renewed. Now, a little bit better is in this, the situation is a bit better in the unified informational system of procurement. This is the newest edition. It is the result of the unification of a number of systems. And before that, we had photos and the subjects of the Russian Federation. But the biggest issue with the unified informational system and procurement, according to me, is that they have a lot of different views on these issues. But I think that fragmented openness is the biggest issue. This means that if you work with this data, today you can look separately at who is the procurement, you can separately look at the contract, separately look at what they're procuring. So this is all fragmented. There is no unified data because the system works according to the openness model, not to the analytics model. And there are certain details. I wouldn't say that it's entirely bad because the system gives the full openness of data and we can see this through the server, but it has its own limitations. Another example is the unified portal of the budgeting system. This is a fairly hybrid system. This system is operational work of the Ministry of Finance. We have an enormous amount of personal profiles, of private data here. Once again, we have very fragmented data, a lot of data that is not entirely interconnected. And it's hard or even impossible to trace the entire chain of certain events. And for now, we still are not able to see an entire chain of linked data on any government site. And this is a uniqueness that comes with the difficulty of integrating the entirety of this information. Now, we have a variety of other resources as well here. I'm just giving 6 examples, the majority of which probably most of people here are familiar with, and where we work in the portal Gosrashody. We work on this, analyze this, process this information. I'm not going to go into details about my project, and my colleague Olga is going to go into that more deeper. But I just want to say that before we add any data, we'll already have the data. And our main task is to make sure that this data is aligned and integrated into all the other sources of data. So we don't want to just have a model, take the data, publish the data, and let it be as is. And then we want to process it and give a certain analytics of what we see. But approximately 100 federal government informational systems, 100 out of 800 are directly connected with government finance, directly. Either this is a department system or an industry system or a system that is directly related to the activities of the Ministry of Finance or Economic Development. And parts of these systems have a certain retrospect. We have collected them here on a certain map data. And if we just look for in the Google, if you just search for map data on infoculture or map data on government finance, and we've published this especially to be printed as a PDF format. And we have inventorized such a system. Right now, this system is actually a bit bigger. We have created this map in 2017. And these systems that are to do with finance now have a much higher amount, despite the trend towards more openness in Russia, and despite the threats and despite the new information being published, these systems continue increasing in their amount, more and more of them every year. Now, top level is the example. This is very shallow, but the use of the data in the contracts that are applied somewhere in the open access projects. In some other places, it's used differently, but the data on government finance, this is a topic that is very market or administrative analysis. We have different profiles in this various ways of analysis, and that's what we're doing. We're trying to find out discrepancies. This is a very methodical, long work, but there are a lot of other ways to apply this knowledge and data. For example, we can apply some changes to a certain law being applied. We can look at how the contract profile of a client changes, of the government client, and sometimes this correlation between the changes is very visible, and of course the changes of the government policies in terms of their expenditures. And that I just wanted to share as an introduction, but I really wanted to share the examples around the world. Now in the world, there are a lot of projects, and I would like to share about the three of them. For example, one is the fiscal data of the US. Their IRS has a separate portal for opening up data, and it's especially emphasizing the information that the data has been disclosed almost real time, live, and this portal continues growing. But its uniqueness that makes it stand out from many of other sites is the emphasis on quality and speed. They're saying that we're not giving a lot of data, but the data that we give is tried and very quick with all the metadata in a very comfortable format with current updates. And this is a very current project that is being developed, and we are observing it. We're tracking it in terms of what is happening in other countries, in terms of international analysis. The other project that, for example, was one of the inspirations for our project is the portal of spending in the USA. And this is a portal from opening up information. And this was one of the many international projects where they divide the system of operational control and the system of opening information. These are two crucially different systems. For example, like we have the website of the open budgeting that we have, and the projects of budgeting systems. The same in many countries of the world, the system of open data are created especially separately from the systems in which the work of government finance experts being conducted, meaning that transactional systems are divided and separated from the system of information openness. And in the US, we do have many transactional systems like finance.gov, and that open up lots of different data and collect data for the analytics for the Congress, which were created back in the end of the 90s, and many others as well. There is an entire inherited huge amount of these various systems. And it's clear that here we don't only see the federal expenditures, but the work with the open data with them is built in a number of different formats at the same time. Now you can download the particular organizations, particular supplier or particular client. You can do what they call a bulk download, and you can get the API through which you can get all the operational information very quickly. And the system allows us to interact with this in many other ways, and it is spent on key transparency data systems in the US. And now the next, perhaps one of the most important and interesting projects that's happening in the world, open contracting. Now I'm concentrating on contracting, but we're seeing this in other data as well. We're seeing the ATI and ATA, where we're having international help data. But this is the project for open data regarding all the government contracts. Now here I must take into account that, for example, the things that are to do with government obligations and finance and with government's influence, they don't only take into account the contracts that have budgeting finances present in them, but also every contract that the government engages with any commercial companies or private companies that could be the beneficiaries of said contracts. So, for example, if the government signs an agreement on data exchange with a certain company, this should be disclosed in projects like open contracting. Now, this is an international initiative where a number of countries are participating, a number of cities, a number of areas, and it includes the standard for the ecosystem, the data, the tools, and the main goal of this is the standardization of this data. So, for example, the data that are published in Georgia, in France, in Canada, can be analyzed using the same set of tools, using the same programs, because they all use a unified format. And once again, this is an enormous amount of data that are all sent into this format. They're analyzed in all sorts of means. There are a lot of public projects, there are a lot of public initiatives in this area, but from the international initiatives, this perhaps is one of the most quick in their development. And the general approach is around the world. Now, if we're talking about government policy, if we're talking about the responsibility of politicians, if we are dividing the professional data work and political responsibility, then first of all is the division between the operational systems and systems of open data. Now, the majority of solutions for the projects that are connected with working with finance can be divided into two categories. One is opening up the political activities, so opening up contracts, spendings, and so on. And also we have projects with fiscal data where it's not a question of political responsibility, but where it's a communication between the government financial community with the expert community or the worldwide community. And these two approaches are different, and the distinction is evident. When we're talking about political, they're two very different systems, and we're seeing more and more large data being open. Now, I've given lots of examples where, for example, the data on the contracts and the subsidies are just published as data on the websites of open data, and apart from a minimal form, except, for example, like a budget index, they're not being isn't open. So they're just opened up as data. And then we have different projects created on their analysis. Now, apart from open contracting, as I've talked about, we also have like open outership, open corporations. Some of them have international support, like open contracting. They have the support of the World Bank, such as Open Government Partnership, where the International Bank has been supported. Now, Open Outnership has a number of strong NGOs and governments supporting the project, and they are collecting and opening up the data. And of course, usually all these kind of resources are created according to the plans of the openness of governments. And this is, of course, political responsibility already. Now, let us say 2 words about how it is done in Russia. We have our own specifics, both good and bad. Here, I would not tend to agree with those who say everything is bad or with those who say everything is good. We have it different in different areas. Now, it so happened that the open finances information happens in much better quality than in social policies. For example, I'm saying that it's much easier to find all the contracts for what the schools procured over the past 10 years and to find the average marks of the school, of the pupils who have been graduated from the school over the past 3 years. And because just that data is not kept and that data is kept. And we have a lot of data available to us, and we have a lot of legislative obligations. And according to me, I think nobody has yet fully looked at all legislative acts that require opening data. We have a lot of regulations and legislation that require publishing of data. They're classified fairly well. The classification that currently exists in the Russian budgeting, according to my research in other countries, is unique, although it did become worse after we have moved to the national projects because they have given up a number of classification codes in order to squeeze into the national projects. And as a result, we are getting the amount of classification was decreased from the Ministry of Finance. And we even moved to a different model there where the codes were changed from the expenditures and goals as national projects, but it's compensated in other ways. We have a larger amount of other data, but these trends also do exist. And we've got good ratings, good evaluations, but we do have a problem in Russia. In Russia, over a number of years, since the 90s, we're having issues. I remember the first regulations of government finance and government expenditures. I want to say that we have a very horrible system of reporting of results. It's very hard to correlate the expenditures and the results. We have spare and few projects where it's traceable in the level, on the federal level. It's very rarely where we can see the trace from budget execution or expenditures to a prepared result, like a photo of a built school, for example. You have 2 minutes left. Yeah, it's okay. I'm doing well on time. Now, the problem with planning is that we have a zone that is well analyzed to do with budget spending, to do with budget classification, with government contracts, even though priorly we did not even have this until 2011, 2012, but it's not correlated with plans. And despite the improvements and despite the insufficient information opening, I always say that there is not enough data, but objectively, the data we have is larger than many other countries. We still have unregulated areas. And, you know, we want to color code the budget on the openness and the transparency of how it is being spent and executed. And it's one thing when we're getting subsidies to the companies where they use something with further open data, or it's a completely different situation where subsidies are given to organizations that do not require to open up what they do. It's like government, non-government organizations. They're not part of the 223rd law or many other laws. In a lot of the subjects of the Russian Federation, this is a substantial part of the government budget, approximately 11 to 12%. We've not yet published such a research, but I can say that we are monitoring this based on the reports, and this happens more frequently on the regional level than on the federal level. And yeah, thank you for your attention. I hope that what I've shared was at least a little bit useful. Yes, thank you very much. You made time, and there was a lot of interesting information there. And to continue what you just said, I'd like to pass the word to Olga Prahimovich. Olga, can you please introduce yourself, because they shared your data with me, but it got deleted somewhere along the way. So please, can you introduce yourself all over again? Yes, hello, and thank you very much for this invitation. I'm going to briefly talk about what data are available in Russia, and I'm going to talk about what problems do we face when we publish the data. And as Ivana has said, we are working on 2 projects on government spendings, where we are trying to make the government data understandable to the citizens, and the project government spending.gov.ru, where we open up the information on subsidies, on grants, and on contracts. First of all, I want to thank the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Federation, and I want to thank them for the availability of data, then we can work with it. And we are still one of the more open countries in terms of finance. Now, if we're to look at what is happening with the open financial data, then we will look if we're to look what's happening over the past 3 years, we'll see what is happening. We've had the introduction of the open government in 2018, and nobody has yet seen this responsibilities shifted. We have seen the exclusion of open budget index metrics, and they were there for a number of years, but the Ministry of Finance was trying to improve this rating. And we've seen also the budget apps competition being excluded in the meaning of 2018. We've closed the we no longer have a published register of subsidies, even though according to legislation it must. And the more critical one is that we are lacking the data on regional and municipal budgets that must be published according to the Order 243 from the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Federation. And this should be published since 2018 for regions and 2020 for municipalities. And we're not talking about this data not being available on the websites of regional and federal subjects, but that they should be published on the website of the electronic budget in an analyzed and detailed way. And also we're getting some empty plans being accepted regarding the concept of openness. And yesterday we've had a vote go about the plan of informational openness. First of all, we need the data to be analyzed, and the information on the website of the Treasury Department must be open. And I'm not going to stop in detail about the vote, but let me talk about the national projects and the programs. A lot has been said about them over the past years. Now, the data that existed priorly is the website of the government programs and the website of the national projects. Now, the government programs is done by the Ministry of Finance. It's not updated, so there's no information. And at a national project, there is also no information about the subsidies, no information about the contracts or any other information that could be used when we would be developing any program aids for this. Now, the programs of the monitoring of the achievement of national goals is something we also need to sort. And we also have seen the launch of the EPBS project from the national project. Now we can only use the data from the budgeting that are being published on the portal of EPBS and on the reporting of the execution of the federal budgets and the databases of the Ministry of Finance. There is no other information. There was no other information for the national projects. So we've created a separate module that would contain the information on subsidies, on contracts with the data of all the counterparts, and we are renewing this data daily, and we want to integrate this module into the budget module later on. On every project, we have a number of subsidies and contracts available, and we see how many people are involved in subsidizing and in receiving the subsidies. Here you can see all the contracts, all the subsidies, and look at who is responsible for the allocation of the funds. Now I would like to talk about the problems that we've encountered when developing the database for the national projects. Now, I want to say that there is no machine-readable data, but the problem is also that we were missing the passports of the national projects. Right now, not all the passports are available, not all of them are published openly. And when we were publishing the first version of this module, we had to manually see in terms of what was being published, and we had to manually try and combine the available data into one. Recently, we've seen the module of the national project being launched on the Electrical Budget website, and on this website, there's a comment about the fact that the website is under development. And in March, we have encountered that based on the information on the website, the data was updated on March, but the information still remains wrong. At the end of the last year, we had Golikova take the national project Tatiana, but in 2021, we still see it being with Chernyshenko, which is not correct. When we're talking to technical support of the Treasury Chamber of the Russian Federation, they have corrected it, and we see 12 results, and we see a number of metrics. So we need to look at what's happening with the data. Another problem is lack of methodology of how we can download the contracts on national projects. When we just started working on this, we were given a number of data of the Treasury, and we understood that this data has not only the contracts for national projects, but it has other data as well. The data had more than just the information to a certain code and to a certain budget. And these data was unusable. And we've encountered that there is no methodology of downloading contracts. Even the Treasury Department didn't have it. And the other part is the coding of the projects. As you know, the national projects are coded in a Latin letter, and then the next symbol is usually a number, is the code of the project. But some of the projects had more than 9. Some of the projects had more than 9 symbols, and we forgot that they're being labeled in letters, but these letters are no longer Latin. They're Cyrillic, meaning that the representatives of the clients who are filling up the data on the government contracts, they are not aware of this, so they just put into Latin letters. And then once again, we're unable to find these sort of contracts automatically. In a similar way, we have a problem with filling up the data on the national projects. From the very beginning, the procurement, where we have seen the use of Latin letters in the coding, and this where the purchasing for the national projects are economy, but the contracts used Cyrillic. And once again, this is a incorrect number that we can't automatically trace. Another issue is that the contracts can be financed from a number of national projects. So in the same contract can have 2 sources of financing, and it's hard to make sure to correlate the codes of the national classifications and the particular national projects. So we can have one project, but one contract, but 2 projects, and we can't understand what has been purchased from which national project in one particular contract when there is more than one national project financing contract. And the last problem, we frequently see incorrect data input in terms of source of financing. So we can't always trace that we are downloading the budgeting data, and we can't be sure that we have downloaded all the data on the national projects. The problem in the development of databases was the same, because we're also trying to use the contract subsidies, but we have also encountered that the data on the government programs have also been uploaded to the portal of the open data by the Ministry of Economic Development, and they were uploaded in the wrong fashion. So we have used the format of uploading the data from the system of WARD, and they tried to present the text information as structured data, and of course this is unusable. One of the key issues is the lack of registry of companies in an open source format. We don't have the registry open, and the data of the registry is only available via paid subscription. We also have one more Yarus registry, which is also available. So we do not have an opportunity to use any registry of companies that we could compare the data on the companies and the subsidies and the contracts. And as you know, the budgeting is published on every level, on the municipal, regional, and federal levels. And over the past 5 years, they're now available. But there is a problem with the federal level. Up until 2020, the data was published. The data was published on the website of the Ministry of the Russian Federation, and we could download the budgeting plan for every 2 weeks. And since 2019, it is only being published on the website of the electronic budget. And this leads us to a lack of sure-proof Excel files that we could be sure. And the publishing of the federal budget, we've seen 92 trillion of the overall budget, even though we know that the budget could not go above 20 trillion. So that was a clear mistake, and which is why we can't be sure in the data that is being published, because there just seems to be clear typos. We have also found mistakes in the federal budget database. We have not seen the legislation being reflected in what we're seeing, even though the electronic form right now is considered to be the main form. And the electronic form is the way that this legislation is being passed through in the government Duba. And we have seen the budget increased in 1,000 times. We've seen just typos with extra zeros. We've seen sometimes doubling up of budgeting expenditures, and not everywhere, like only in some cases. We couldn't just divide things by 2. We've seen numbers just multiplied by 2 randomly with the Ministry of Transport, and we also seen data of deleted lines of the budget. How much more time do you need? I think 3-4 minutes. Okay, you have 3-4 minutes. We also have problems with the regional budgeting. So, for example, the budget of Moscow is 137 billion as of tomorrow, even though we know that the budget of Moscow is 2.1 trillion. The Ministry of Finance knows this, but we're still getting questions on this. And they're still directing us instead of correcting themselves. And in order to be more brief, I'm not going to go into all the problems that we encounter when working with the data on the open budget, but I'm just going to talk about government procurement and general problems with the Treasury Department portal. The advantage of the Treasury Department website are that the data are filled out directly by the organizations that are the sources of this information. But on the other hand, it is also a problem because not every technological format can be coded. And as a result, we end up with some missing spaces with the data. The mistakes can be present in any field. This can be mistakes in the currencies and the sums. And for example, we were comparing the data in the contracts between Solgaz and Gazprom, and we have seen 168 options and variants of how Solgaz company was named. We've also encountered a contract of the municipal government entity that was 224 billion. And of course, this contract could not exist. It's just the representative of the client made a mistake with 3 zeros. And I want to say that the Treasury is starting to respond to the request. And over a week ago, we've seen that the planned procurement of 44 on the 44th federal law is now 91 is 108 trillion, and we see how the data is being corrected in case mistakes are found quicker now. We also work with subsidies. I could talk about them, but because time is limited, I think I will not. And as a conclusion, I'd like to say that the majority of problems could be solved if the government entities would use their data, because every time when we try to add new data to our project, we run into issues that this data was not used by anyone before us, and we run into some problems that could be visible at the first look on the data. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for a very interesting and detailed presentation. Seeing that all these is going to be published on the site, everybody can read what you had no time to say. This is very important because without you, especially your last comment, this is as important as our other presentations. And now we're again going to leave the confines of our country. And I'm passing the word to Sabun Thomas, to the coordinator of the Center of Budget Research in Cochin in India. So Sabu Thomas, the floor is yours.
Yes, I would like to tell you something. I would like to tell something briefly about the participatory budgeting in our country, India, and myself from the state of Kerala. In India, it is still not treated with its due status that it deserves and apportioned with only limited initiatives. The central and most of the state governments are not following the participatory budgeting system. However, by the passing of 73rd and 74th Amendments of the Indian Constitution in 1993, decentralized planning system was introduced for all rural and urban local governments. Following this, the budget system in the Gram Panchayat and municipalities were prepared and based on the provisions in the constitutional amendments. In the local level governments and the states, in Kerala, one of the Indian states tried to experience participatory budgeting through the decentralized planning in 1996. In fact, it was a system of 6 multi-stage participatory planning, right from each ward of Gram Panchayat to district planning committee. In Panchayat level, approximately there are about 10 to 30 wards with the population ranging from 1,000 to 2,000 in each ward. In the Panchayat ward level, Grama Sabha prioritizes the budget for the next financial year and forward it to the next higher level of Panchayat committee, where they discuss with the elected local government members and the concerned bureaucrats. After discussion with the budget of aggregates from all wards will make recommendations by the respective panchayats. They are task forces for sectoral working groups, that representatives of elected members for education, infrastructure, poverty alleviation, and waste disposal. These task forces, after a due assessment, finally identify projects that are to be implemented. Those that are to be implemented are then prioritized and sent to the next higher level, which is the block panchayat. The elected delegates delegates of implementation of project. The method is the same for municipality, but only three-stage clearance is required. One major problem being faced in the implementation of the participatory budgeting is the inadequate technical expertise of the elected members in the local bodies to successfully carry out the implementation. However, this method is not mandatory. Presently, the panchayat or municipalities in Kerala is prepared based on the recommendation for standing committees. These standing committees are for health, education, welfare, and financial aspects. Ward member shall be member of any of the standing committee. Recommendations of the standing committee shall be present in the panchayat municipal administrative authority committee to pass the budget for the respective financial year. In Pune Municipal Corporation, 2007 initiated participatory budgeting, and that has to be considered as an important attempt. Pune is the 9th largest city of India with a population of 3.2 million, and where some extremely poor live in slums along with the wealthy people which are living at attractive urban areas. Therefore, participatory budgeting aimed to create a form of direct participation, citizen participation in the budget allocation in order to make the process of budget creation and implementation more inclusive, transparent, affordable, and effective. Administrative structure of governance that supports participatory budgeting in Pune is divided between 4 zones. The zones are again subdivided into 15 administrative wards, which are further subdivided into 77 propas, a small governance unit of the city. There are certain other municipalities or corporations have started this participatory budgeting system, but so far no much information about this. In Odisha state, online platform has provided for people of the state to express their views, opinion, and suggestion on sector-wise public expenditure and taxation related issues for revenue augmentation for the budget formulation for the financial year 2016-17. But the actual information of these are not available so far. Anyway, in India, the participatory budgeting system in the local governments, municipalities, and Panchayat Raj institutions in India has not made expected results so far. However, the local governments in the state of Kerala are doing participatory budgeting as a decentralized planning system based on the constitutional provisions. And then, in many places, participatory budgeting was limited to an initiative. In states like Delhi and Odisha, only small benefits alone have been experienced so far. So, as there is no much participatory budgeting system in India, only this much information which I can be shared with you. Thank you.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much for an interesting. We're very happy to hear from you from India. And I would like to say that at the beginning of the century in India, this project was developing fairly seriously. And I remember how I was in Mumbai, in Bombay, where there was an international conference on the budgeting projects. And so back then it was already developed, but of course everything comes in waves. And so I'm very, very happy that you are taking part in this conference following our long-term traditions of cooperation. And I just remember when I was presenting in this conference and we had a very old Indian gentleman, one of the union workers, said that I was fighting my whole life for the workers' rights, but I was doing this standing on the barricades. And only recently I understood that I can also fight for the workers' rights by influencing the budget. And I remember this quote from the Indian gentleman, but thank you very much. We still have 2 presentations left. And this is from Anna Alexandrovna Belenchuk and Lyudmila Mikhailovna Tsareva. And after this, we are going to slowly move on to conclusions. And I would like to invite Anna Alexandrovna Belenchuk, the government advisor of the 2nd level, and we are going to talk about green budgeting, a new tool for budget transparency and accountability. Okay, so your presentation is already up. Anna Alexandrovna, we are listening to you. You need to turn on the microphone. Now you need to turn on the microphone by yourself. We can do it for you. Yes, I understood how it's done. Esteemed colleagues, good day. For the past 13 years, I'm studying the modern tools of informing the budget in the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Federation. For a long time, I've been heading the Department of Analysis, the department that is doing the budgeting reforms. And for a long time, I've been part of the OECD. I've been part of departments that helped implement OECD sustainable goals. And now I'm no longer part of the heads, but one of the innovations and one of the new tools on controlling the budgeting tools is green or ecological budgeting. On a slide, you can see the definition of the green budgeting as a process of the use of the budget policies of the governments to achieve ecological and climate goals. This is something that OECD gives us, and also it adds that green budgeting evaluates how spent budgets are impacting the surrounding environment. Now, why do we talk about this in terms of relation to the citizens? Yesterday, Margarita Fedorovna Zamyatina mentioned this in our presentation. I think I can't put it better, because today the citizens are very concerned with the problems of ecology that are impacting all of us, because this is our health and this is our future in essence. But any reliable data about the ecological situation is, as usual, but we are missing data on this situation. But the various tools on the regulation of the finances are introduced as a response to the tasks that are introduced in a certain period of time. And so the program of the budget is called to create the results, and the national and federal projects are helping to prioritize the expenditures. The budgets for the citizens are aimed at increasing the openness of the government finances at the first level. Let us just call it something to familiarize yourself with. And the listed tools, just as many others in the Russian Federation of controlling budgets, are in alignment with international standards and norms and are widely used in foreign countries. From this point of view, the Russian tools of budget management are in alignment with international standards and requirements that has been numerously proved by the International Monetary Fund and by the International Budget Partnership. And I would like to say that as of today in Russian publications and the problems of the government finance, the problem of green financing in terms of the budget systems are not even taken into account, despite its wide development in other countries, and also taking into account that the Russian Federation has undertaken voluntarily obligations in upholding the sustainability goals and the upholding of the Paris Accords. Now, regarding the green budgeting, I think that it is important to say that the acceptance in 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals by the UN up until 2030 were instrumental to creation of the green budgeting. And we see the SDG 6, 7, 12, 13, 14, and 15 when they are related to the issues of ecology and climate. and also undertaken within SDG, the Paris Climate Accords. And if you know the text of the accords, you know that the third goal is making sure that the financial flows are in alignment with the development that is characterized by a low level of output and by resistance to the climate change. And I would also like to note that in October 2019, the government of the Russian Federation has accepted the Paris Accords, and within that, within its implementation, we have seen the national plan being approved and the first plan of the adaptation to the climate change up until the period of 2022. And currently, we're seeing a discussion on the long-term development of the Russian Federation with the low level of greenhouse gases up until 2050. And also the Ministry of Economic Development has prepared a draft of a legislation on the regulation of greenhouse gas emissions. But despite the number of sources of methodology for green budgeting, and that is including the European Economic Commission, I think that the engine for the development of green budgeting in the world is still the OECD, that in December of 2017 has launched the Paris Cooperation on the creation and the accommodation of green budgeting. And the cooperation here makes sure that we are able to adapt the traditional budgeting tools in order to help intertie and intertwine the national incomes with the climating and with other ecological goals. This means the creation of a clear connection between the government finances and their influence on the surrounding environment. Here on the slide, you can see the main methodological documents that have been published by the Directorate of the Government Management for the OECD countries from the period of 2017 to 2020. Now, I want to say that in 2021, recently the documents were added to with manuals for the government of countries in terms of how to mark the budget expenditures based on how much they influence the surrounding environment, and how to interlink the budget sustainability and how to integrate the green budgeting in terms of restoring the government budgets and finance after the pandemic of COVID-19. The interesting part about these documents is that along the general lines, they include particular examples and difficulties that they encounter and also possible solutions to these. Now, according to our evaluation, such methodological support and such exchange of experience between the different working groups on the OECD over the next few years is going to lead to the creation of green budgets in many countries. Now, the main recommendation of the OECD is the approach to the creation of the green budget would integrate the existing government finance and fund management in order to use the strongest sides of the budget process and to adapt it to the current limitations. So, for example, if a country already has an existing system of budgeting, the green budgeting system can be integrated on the results and that are interlinked with the national goals regarding climate and greenhouse gases. Also, the green budgeting can be integrated into the review of budgeting expenditures, especially on the ecology expenditures. OECD developed an approach to the green budgeting that is basing on 4 key elements that are making each other, that are empowering each other, that are presented on the slide. And these are the blocks within the current system of the government finances in any country. And I'm just going to briefly talk about each of the blocks, and I'm going to say, what does this mean when we're talking about our country? Now, the first block is a strong system of strategic planning. We need to make sure that strategic priorities and the government goals in terms of the government would be clearly laid out, and that would help us make interconnected decisions now regarding the expenditures and expenditures. And here, I think we need to note that because of the SDG, the country started to transform their systems of strategic planning for it to not directly to correlate, because there's no task like that, but for it to be able to monitor the separate achievement of separate SDGs. And I would like to remind you that they're fully voluntary, and taking into account that the SDG has the communication block, this will allow to an entire batch of standardized ecology data to appear that would be based on an international methodology. Second block, The tools for collecting the information for green budgeting, these are the tools that will help to collect the evidence that will prove that the budgeting measures do influence the climate and environmental goals. Among these tools, the OECD names the marking based on green budgeting, so classifying the budgeting measures based on their influence on the environment. This is also the evaluation on the influence on the environment, so a separate requirement for an assessment on the influence of the environment as part of a legislation. This is also an introduction of a price limit to harmful impacts. These are also the questions on expenditures of ecology. And if you don't know this tool, I would highly recommend to look at this website of the Ministry of the Finance of the Russian Federation. From 2019, we've seen a number of reviews, also including the ones for the ecology, in order to improve their efficacy. So it's not only the accounting department that is analyzing this direction, and the information that is collected with these tools is later suggested to be used for the analysis and to make good budget decisions. Now, the next block is regarding the good structure for the management, both for the parliament and for the civic citizenship. This allows us to more easily study the measures of government support in order to achieve the goals in the climate and the environment. In many countries like the UK, a public tool of accountability can be the claim for the green budget that is being added to the budget that contains the overall image of how does the budget correlate with the ecological tasks in each particular budgeting year. And the last block includes the integration into the current budgeting system that already exists and already functions within the country, and that can help achieve a strong foundation to introduce the green budgeting. And so this includes, once again, strategic planning, midterm budgeting, budgeting as a result, and an efficient interaction between the parliament and the civic society regarding the budget. And briefly, if we are to take the example of the Russian Federation, and if we are to look at all the 4 blocks that are presented here, we have the system of strategic planning, we have the federal law on strategic planning. We already have a list of documents, a part of which is the government program, including the government program on protecting the environment. And just recently, the system of government planning was added to with 13 national projects, with 176 federal projects, and we have a national project in ecology now as well. Now, to add to this, according to the audit chamber, the tasks of the national programs and various government programs, they are all in line with the 17 SDGs. And for example, we have the 4, 6, 7, and 15 SDGs reflected in ecology. And if we are to talk about green budgeting in Russia, we have the information that is needed from the tax collection and taxation in general that can be looked at as an DPI, like the transport tax and others. And in Russia, we also have the practice of reviewing the expenditures on the ecology. And now, from what is yet not being used is the way that it impacts the environment, but this is very far few and in between. On block 3, now regarding the openness of information that can be used for opening the data on how the government entities work on achieving SDGs, and this includes the ecology, and the budget codex does have an openness foundation involved. On block 4, the Russian finance control system is fully modern and is in line with the international standards, and I've already spoken about this earlier, and this is the midterm planning and the evaluation of taxation systems. And this is how we can say that preliminary in the Russian Federation, we have the necessary institutionalized mechanisms in order to implement the environmental budgeting, green budgeting, taking into account the current world priorities. And first of all, the OECD, the SDGs, and the Paris Accords regarding the resistance to climate change and retention of the good climate. Now, this will require a lot of interdepartmental cooperation between the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Ecology, and Natural Resources, and we'll need to make sure that that happens in order for us to be able to mark the expenditures and the income based on its influence of based on its impact to the environment. Now, the next I'm going to talk about France with a full green budget, the first example in the world. France is the first country in the world that was able to publish a green budget, a fully fledged green budget, as is considered by the international experts. In 2019, the French government has presented a full methodology of how they are intending to mark the costs and the earnings of the budget of France based on their influence on the environment. They have made sure this information is made available to everybody who is responsible for allocating budgets, for them to be able to mark all of their allocations based on this methodology. And in 2021, 2021 is going to be the first financial year when France is actually going to be implementing the green budget that has been introduced. Our colleagues from the French Ministry of Finance have highlighted 6 ecological goals. One is the combating the climate change, the economic of a closed circuit, the fighting the pollution, and adding biodiversity. And in each one of these goals, they have tried to evaluate neutral, positive, or negative influences of the way the budget is being spent or how money is being earned into the budget. And the green budgeting in France has drawn to a conclusion that their overall sum of 7.2 billion euro is affecting the environment. 38.1 billion is being impacting it in a good way. And we're seeing that 38.1 is affecting it good, and at least 10 billion euro is being negative, at least on one environmental factor. When the international experts are evaluating the French experience, they're asking, why is this experience successful? Because we are seeing green evaluation to all the budgeting expenditures of the budget, and it's reflecting not only the problems of climate change, but also other ecological issues as well. The 6 criteria that I mentioned on the previous slide, and it assesses not only the expenditures that are impacting the environment in a good way, but also in a bad way, in a negative way. And as a conclusion, I can say that, of course, within the Paris Accords, France has become the first country that has launched a full-scale green budget, and the first suggested legislation for the green budget is going to be introduced in 2021, where for the first time are able to fully analyze the government's budget effect on the environment, and is taking into account all the finances, both government and private, and this allows to drive government policy regarding this issue. France's experience is undoubtedly useful to be studied by other countries that are part of the Paris Accords, and this includes the Russian Federation. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. And we have the final presentation. Thank you very much for an amazing presentation, and thank you for keeping to your time. And our last presentation, and I would like to invite Lyudmila Tsareva. Lyudmila Tsareva, the Dean of the Financial Institute with the government. She's going to talk about the role of the monitoring institutions and opening the budget and increasing the financial literacy of the populace. Good day, colleagues. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. Thank you. Thank you very much for allowing me to present during this presentation and to perhaps present a fairly lengthy body of work that is being carried out over a number of years now. Being a dean of the audit chamber, we pay special attention to teaching our students within the borders of our activities, of the external bodies of the monitoring institutions of control of the Ministry of Finance and the Chamber of Commerce of the Russian Federation, where we are overviewing the entirety of the activities of government external monitoring and control on a regional level. And of course, we would like to note a couple of words about the role of our highest level of control, the audit chamber, the place that the audit chamber holds in the organizational structures. We see this monitoring work being undertaken from 1995. We were walking towards this, and now we see that the audit chamber is chairing the INDASI. Of course, we would like to underline the role that the audit chamber is playing in the evaluation of our overall openness of the Russian budget. And I would like to talk about the information from the evaluation of the rating of the index of the openness of the budget. Our audit chamber is currently in Russia in general is number 14. We see the European countries. Here we see the Eastern European and Western European countries. We see we are fairly high up. And I would also like to look at a number of countries that are members of the regional organization of external bodies of control on a regional level, which is why we have selected a number of countries that on one hand are high up in the ratings in terms of the index of the open budget, but who also have other high metrics, also the participation of the highest audit body's role that it plays. And we're talking about generally the country and where the rating is being conducted. But we would like to direct your attention that we see that we have a fairly low civic involvement, and this was noted in the index. Now, let's look at Great Britain, because we are going to come back to the UK again later in terms of Welsh experience. But please do look that with this selection, we have UK, where we have a very high level of civic participation of 61. The other ones are not even up to 30, which is generally noted all over the index. But in the Russian Federation, we are holding a rating on the openness of subjects. And according to this review of ours, we have a seventh separate category in terms of the evaluation of fiscal control. This review allows us to look at how the highest audit bodies are participating on the regional level, and also allows us to look at the general selection. But right now, we have a very limited selection. And now, how did these selections work out? We've included the regions where the audit chamber is a direct participant of this previous selection. Now, these regions are not getting any subsidies to make their budgeting system function, and these regions have a very high evaluation in terms of the audit chambers. They were highly evaluated in the general ratings of the openness of budgeting data in the subjects of the Russian Federation. And as an example, we have taken 4 audit entities, and it so happened that we've taken the Moscow region of Moscow, of St. Petersburg, and of the Leningrad region. Now, we have taken these ones in our selection because of the reasons mentioned above. It's a fairly strange selection, but based on this example, we are going to try and look at the bodies that are perhaps for others could be a good example. And we can look at the selection, but given this, of course, at the level of the audit chamber and of other audit organs and the provision of information to the interested users who are going to be getting the information in this case, they're going to be the residents of the regions, and they don't have a very high level of financial literacy. So in our example on the slide, you can see the subjective evaluation that has been carried out by a certain group, and this was carried out by students with a certain high level of understanding of budgeting and budgeting processes and so on. And if we are to take even 2 regions as example, the audit chamber of Moscow and the audit chamber of the Moscow region, but once again, we're saying that this evaluation is fairly subjective. It is not based on the approach of the Ministry of Finance or of the Institute of Finance. It is based on an approach. It is based on a general openness approach, but given that, we still see that even the regions that are getting a very high evaluation in the Ministry of Finance ratings, maybe it is subjective data to an extent, but the users were fairly critical. The target audience that is later going to be receiving the necessary information and who are going to introduce this information to their relatives, to people who they know. And so we need to understand that the audit chamber is the source of information that is reliable and that is relevant. And it provides that valuable information that is basing itself on the principle of independency of the highest audit bodies. And so, of course, I'd like to direct your attention to a quote from the overview of the openness of the budget, a quote that is talking about the fact that when the populace is studying the information provided on the official websites, the populace is going to improve its financial literacy, and slowly improving their financial literacy, we are going to slowly shift towards the control of finances on the regions and on the level of the Russian Federation as such. So, concluding my presentation, there's a lot of work that has been conducted with this regard. There was a lot of work on studying a number of audit chambers, and we have seen great practices applied and practices on information transparency. Perhaps they were not as well evaluated as they could be if we were using some other methods, but I would like to look at one of the examples at the audit chamber of the Welsh audit chamber. And I would like to note the number of moments that are visible to an average user, very good visualization of the information, very simple infographics. And it's a great bonus that this information can also be listened to as well as looked at. But of course, we want to talk about our audit chambers and our audit institutions where their activities must be evaluated justly. As an example, we can see a number of selections, and these selections include the audit institution of the Moscow region, and we have taken the example of their website, and we don't have such good examples as the audit chamber of Wales, but generally it's a very positive trend. We see it's a fairly good website, and the way that the information presented is interesting. Now, what are the sources for this information? Now, the sources are such things as activity reports, the results of the preliminary audit of the operational analysis and the further control of the execution of the budget of the subject, and the report on the provided data, and also any controlled and expert activity. And of course, we would very much like for this information to be presented more vividly, more visually, and maybe we should implement the experience of Wales, where we are having the information present very briefly, but very vividly. And I don't think that it's right to say that the various auditing chambers of various regions are not doing it. Like every audit institution in every region has their interesting practice that could be scaled. But I want to say that this is the platform that, thanks to the way that auditing bodies are working, that it is an independent body, the competent audit chamber body. It can provide the information in a format that is comfortable, that is well understood, as we are doing in the audit chamber of the Russian Federation. At the same time, this information could be full, even though now it's not. Currently, this is not as difficult as it may seem, and such a recommendation perhaps will allow our populace, not only the students that are interested, not only the people in the universities who are interested, but also it will allow the citizens of the regions, or the information about which is being presented on the website, will allow us to increase the literacy and to improve their approach and work. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present. Thank you for your presentation. You have done a great job of concluding our program of our conference, of our main part of the conference. So thank you very much. And right now we are slowly moving into drawing the conclusions. And I hope, yes, if we can turn off the presentation, thank you. And so, dear colleagues, we are currently moving towards the final stage. We are actually going to be done on time, hopefully, maybe even earlier if we'll manage to. But right now you have an opportunity to present, to share your opinions about the conclusions of the conference. And also I would like to note the directions. I want you to note the working groups in development of which you would like to participate in when we're preparing the conference 2020. And we hope that this conference is going to be held in an offline format, maybe with invitations of some foreign guests. We're used to the online participatory format, but this conference for now is an open field and an open book. And I would like to remind you that even this panel was originally planned as an intermediary step, because we understand that it's very important as is, because we have created a very great amount of collective ideas. And even today, the work was very impressive. And it's clear that we are online, but nevertheless, so we have seen international, interregional, and we have seen and heard a lot of great ideas being spoken about. So once again, I do sincerely hope that in chat for now, nobody is volunteering apart from people who are expected to, but you can just talk about what direction you would like to work in. Just name the working group that you'd like to work in. I also have things that I'd like to say, but first I'd like to listen to the feedback from some of our colleagues. So I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but then perhaps we organizers are also going to say our word, but I've suggested Andrei Chuganova. Andrei Chuganova, are you here? Okay, you're here? Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, we can hear you. It's good. Well, colleagues. Vladimir Vladimirovich, it's been a long time since I wanted to know you. I have read your works, and we have looked and we have studied the reports that are being published by with your activities. And we know Alexander Yurievich since I don't know when, since ages, and we have been partners in a number of different forums. So our team for maybe 5 years now is very closely involved in working with the topic of electronic participation, electronic citizen participation. Last year, we have concluded a 3-year project of RNF, and we have published a collective monography in which the component of initiative budgeting is denoted as a very important channel of electronic participation. So we, in our concept, are highlighting 7 main channels of electronic participation, and 2 of them are directly related to the topic that we are extensively discussing today, and that we were extensively discussing yesterday. It's initiative budgeting and the different websites and resources that are to do with opening up the budget. And even there is a certain model or a certain scheme that we are suggesting as a foundation for an institutionalized study, for the study of the institutional specifics of electronic participation in the Russian Federation. These 2 channels, they are denoted especially as the channels in which we're not just holding discussions, where we're not just seeing the feedback or complaints from the citizens, but where there is an opportunity, and mostly important, where there is a practice that this channel of feedback is able to impact not just the nature of the decisions, but that can directly impact the execution, the activities, so that it would logically, together with other channels, with other ways of feedback, but that it could truly impact the changes of the institutional structure of the society, and most importantly, of our environment. and the very sustainable development goals that we've talked about, they can be reviewed here as a highest category, as the highest priority, highest task of development of the local community, of the town, of the region, and so on. Therefore, to me and to my colleagues, it seems like a logical thing to do to make sure that we are investing our experience into this, and we want to work on the details of electronic interaction and of civic involvement. And of course, we do hold our own conferences where this component is present. So we do have an audience that is, well, it's clear that our conferences are more scientific because we are publishing, and we do have international conferences as well. And we do have colleagues that know us abroad very well. So we are publishing our collected works in the Springer Publication House. It's a fairly well-known publishing house for humanitarian conference, at least. So thank you very much. Alexander Yuryevich, can I please comment on what you just said a bit later? Because what you said is very important, and I wanted to talk about this yesterday, but Andrei Vladimirovich has just reminded me about this. Now, the thing is that as we are getting deeper into an understanding of what is participatory budgeting, and as we are trying to formulate the theory and the methodology of this process, a lot is becoming clearer in all of this. But originally, if we are to look at the very first texts, the very first theoretical texts that were published 10 years ago, 15 years ago, in a methodological sense, they were very vague. And right now I see that in these texts, and these texts are the ones that are quoted the most right now, we had back then we had a huge diversity in various forms, and these were different forms of what today we now call the citizen involvement. But usually there was but typically there were no budget solutions in those forms, or budget solutions were so deep down that they were invisible in those earlier publications. And so we had this sort of a collection of everything, which was constantly modified. But today, it's slowly, at least in our understanding, is starting to be more clear and methodological in terms of its foundation. So for us, participatory budgeting is something that is now more clear. First of all, we know it's a budget, and we are getting a lot of various. As soon as we understand it's budgeting, a lot of interaction formats straight away get put aside. And why am I mentioning this right now? Because at the will of historic peculiarities of the Russian way of development, the initiative budgeting has turned into this flagship of this broader process that is called citizen participation in the government and municipal management, because nobody else is talking about this right now. If you are to look out, it's just not present. And in a surprising fashion, people are talking about this frequently, and ideas do sometimes come up. But on the level of methodology and on the level of theory, nobody's saying anything new regarding this, and nothing is happening in terms of new things. So we do have a unique opportunity to create such an ecosystem that, using the methodology of initiative budgeting and budgeting in general, could give us this challenge that could be given out to an entire country. And so this is not a story about politics. This is a story about how can we manage a country more efficiently with the use of government involvement. And what you are talking about in terms of electronic democracy is super important, because the participation is going to be digital, regardless of whether we want to or not. The question is in the correctness of the methodology that is going to be put at the foundation of such participation. Today, when we see today, when we see the IT platformers involved with this, when we see the technological platform dominating the understanding of what this participation is happening for, we clearly see a lack of breakthrough, and we see a continuing just listing of varying products. And of course, now we need to make sure we do develop a quality methodology of digital participation, because nobody has yet done anything new with this regard. We're continuously going in and out of existing solutions. So if we do unite our efforts in this direction, of course, this is going to be very needed, very right, and very timely. And I would also like to support this, that what Andrei Vladimirovich has talked about on this conference, and the collections of our publications are also things that are super important, and also things that can be a part of the general resource. This is great. Thank you. And if you will allow, I will allow the word to Katarina Ott, who wanted to say the final word and the concluding side. She's our good time partner, and she's a great friend from Croatia. Katarina, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, listening those 2 days, I was fascinating how you managed to gather people from various backgrounds. And that confirms what I always thought, that we always have to have in mind that we are all in the same boat. Whether we are coming from ministries of finance, whether from local financial departments, whether from non-governmental organizations or academia like I do, we are all paying taxes. We are all paying social security contributions. We are all sending our children to public schools. We are all going to public hospitals when we are sick. So we all are really deeply interested in how our money is collected and how our money is spent. We all have to be interested in the efficiency and the equity of our public funding. So what we should do is improve budget transparency. Through improving budget transparency, we will enable this public participation, and we will probably have better public policies. Best practices do exist, examples do exist. It's all up to us. Nobody else can do it for us. I am amazed with all this digitalization, with platforms, with various possibilities, but still, I'm afraid that it is a kind of tricky, because me, as a professor from the Faculty of Mathematics, I'm very well aware that there are not so many people around us that can think really analytically. So we have to present it all to media, to journalists, to average citizen in some better way. If you will ever be interested, a group of people from Institute of Public Finance in Zagreb, Croatia is working on that, and we would be happy to cooperate and to join your groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katarina. Спасибо большое.
Yes, thank you very much, Katarina. We would be very happy, and we do hope that our new partners, and truly, I think over these 2 days, a very important thing is happening of what we can call an expert community, or what we can call a epistemic group of people of knowledge who on one hand clearly understand how how the system of governance works. Some are from the system of governance, and people who are speaking about barely not making it into the government and trying to keep away from it. And we, at least part of us, understand what is a civic society, and at least we at the Center of Strategy think we know what civic society is. And this system of mediation, this is my favorite topic, but nevertheless, I think it's very interesting. But now talking about me, I'm going to allow the word to Tatiana Vinogradova, but then I'm going to say on my behalf, in order not to go far away from this. Now, of course, I'm also very interested in electronic participation, but within this direction, I'd like to focus on the topic of efficacy, on the criteria of efficacy. And of course, it's clear that here we we'll have to find the criteria, and we'll have to make sure that we can find out imitation or manipulation. And I think that the criteria for the efficacy is very important. The various efficacy of various public participation, and this is what I would like to work on, and I would like to invite those who are interested in this aspect. And Tatiana Vinogradova, your suggestions, you wanted to have the floor? Tatiana? Yeah, my microphone is on. Well, responding to the comment of Vladimir Vladimirovich regarding that nobody was working on this topic of budgeting involvement of the civic society, I would like to direct your attention, and I've already noted this before, regarding the reflection of the SDGs in the budgeting. In the international community, it is well accepted that the citizen participation in the government budgeting decisions are to do with sustainability, and the help to create an inclusive and an open society. This involves launching processes with citizen involvement, at the foundation of which there is mutual decision-making and mutual responsibility for achieving goals in this globally accepted agenda. We as experts know about this global agenda, but some people treat it as if it's something out there. We are here, they're somewhere far away. But at least us on the expert level, we have to understand that 192 countries in 2015 have come to an agreement regarding these goals, and that this is our guiding marker. And we have highlighted the biggest problems, and only by applying mutual effort can we achieve this overall movement towards sustainable development. Just like Katarina just told us, right now it is more clear than ever before that we are all in the same boat. And sustainable development goals right now are focusing not only on improving the state of our planet, but also it's focusing on the inclusivity, from gender equality to income equality and to opportunities equality. And what topic would I like to suggest? What section or what expert pool would I like to be a part of? I think in our context, it is extremely important to note the topic of interacting with the socially vulnerable groups of citizens while we are improving the budgeting transparency. And this becomes especially important when we are talking about existing in the conditions of the pandemic of COVID-19. I mean, nothing has significantly changed except for we are now starting to get the vaccinations, and we don't exactly know how these vaccinations are being given out. But nevertheless, these mechanisms of interacting with the socially vulnerable groups are necessary in order for us to gain a better understanding of how the budget affects different groups of people. And it is also important for us to understand how does the government combat inequality, how does it combat poverty, for us to be able to mark the expenditures that we are spending on the poor. We do have, for example, the disabled, the socially disabled, but we don't have a marking for poverty, and we have no idea what are we doing in terms of poverty. Social groups that previously were not touched by poverty before the pandemic, even though we see a growth in poverty, we have a growth in inequality, and this has been proven on the World Economic Forum. But right now, its growth is felt because of the pandemic. So many of those who were before not poor are now becoming part of these socially vulnerable groups. Now, what mechanisms of participation can be introduced for these socially vulnerable groups? Must they directly be involved in budgeting processes? And must they tell us that, please, we're here, help us, this is the most efficient solution? Or should it happen differently? Should it happen through civic organizations? And what if public organizations are not as well developed, and if they don't have adequate financing, and if they don't have anything and they don't know what to do? So how can they function, and how can they represent the interest of these groups? This would indicate that we need different mechanisms of how we can get this done. And all this is, of course, to do with sustainability. And I think that goals, I would also like to note that inclusivity is something that is on the agenda of all the international organizations. So we need to make sure that we're able this is something we need to achieve. We are to achieve the SDGs, and this is one of the key principles that I've been talking about yesterday, one of the initiatives from the Fiscal Transparency Project. So we need to make sure we are aiming towards a sustainable budget and towards interacting with underrepresented or not represented groups of citizens as both part of the process of fiscal transparency and in the process of achieving the SDGs. Okay, Tatiana, I think that now what was important here, I've heard a number of suggestions being said, and I'm pretty sure that the group that is working on the openness of data can definitely also be present. And Ivan Bektin is going to join us with his skills and knowledge on how to use data. We'll be very happy to see him in order to cover this very important area of work. But this is not something that we have to do right away. We definitely do need a group on open data. This is exactly what I've been talking about. So, Olga Prakhimovic, yeah, if you think that it needs to be there, then okay, let it be there. I'm just starting to respond now. Sorry, responding to chat. I see I have learned to speak and to read the chat at the same time now. Improvement, new skill sets. But I think that within a week, we have to, using electronic means of communication, chats, Vladimir Ilyich, maybe using your team that could later perhaps be ready to divide the responsibility areas, but we need to make sure that we exchange information. And I suggest that maybe I'm already seeing other group suggestions from Olga Prakhimovic, and we love to accept it. Maybe we are going to have some other initiative groups. Now, this is first off. Second, we need to exchange the resources and the tools that we're using on the conference. And Alena Vandashova on the opening word yesterday said that regularly at the end of October, we are holding in our faculty a conference on diversity. And this also includes the topic of groups in and working with them. It's very well aligned. We can prepare, Alena's already suggested, we can prepare a session for the end of September. Andrei also have a very renowned conference in St. Petersburg and worldwide as well. Other colleagues who are going to get involved in the process of preparing our conference, they're going to say, hey, we already have our own thing. Well, a conference is an additional capacity for publications. And as the Center for Strategy, we are publishing a special publication, and we can prepare a special issue for our magazine that will be dedicated to this topic, and we can publish it this year. Why not? And it is registered, and maybe we can take it even further. But please, it's a possibility. It's a magazine that we can use to publish most interesting texts. But I'm certain that others also have their own opportunities and capacities. And me and Tatiana, basically on Thursday, we have just submitted the application to the Committee of Social Support on this very topic, on getting the socially vulnerable groups involved in the questions of initiative budgeting. And we'll see what happens. Maybe we'll get a subsidy for this. And this topic is truly, I would say once again, it is very important when we're discussing this conference. On one hand, it is very specific, and on the other hand, it is raising very important topics for the participatory democracy. And on the other hand, it is not politicized, and it's hard to pick somebody who would be against it. And it's also a topic that allows us to speak about real issues. So I think this combination of economists, mathematicians, politologists, urbanists, this is a community that is very important. Moreover, given the fact that we, on the example of this very conference, we have great international cooperation with our long-term partners, with our new partners who are joining this conversation. We have great, interesting presentations, and thereby we are ending up with a big project that is correlating with the Rio de Janeiro logos, think locally, think globally, act locally. So we are starting on local levels, but through regional to national, and at the same time, we can be working with the global issues thanks to the global project. So I think that these couple of general brush strokes that I'm giving out here tells us that our goal and our activities could definitely lead to a result. Now, any other conclusions? If no hands are raised, then maybe Vladimir Vladimirovich, Margarita Zamyatina. Yes, you can always speak up, please. We're always happy to hear you. Please. I think that the questions of ecology have at the end been left out of the discussion. No, we remember, we have been quoting you on the ecology today. No, I mean when we're drawing the conclusions. I mean, we mention it, we speak about it, but I would like to point out two things. First of all, when Tatiana is talking about achieving SDGs, there is an entire range of issues that are to do with reaching SDGs with ecology. But today, initiative budgeting has at its goal the research, first of all, the research of the social area. Of course, here it is the experience, it is an experience that is very extensive. And perhaps the ecology issues could become the object of initiative budgeting for the future. But for now, this problem still remains so big that we can be talking about the fact that maybe only citizens or only civic involvement in the solution of these issues can help solve them. And that includes, I think, the question on green budgeting. So I think that maybe these problems are more of what Tatiana is up to. No, Margarita Zamyatina, this is what you are doing. This is your subject, and the subject from you and your colleagues from Moscow. You as the coordinator for this, please head this. We'll be happy to assist if we can, but this is not initiative budgeting. This is more about civic or social inclusion and involvement. Of course, it's part of it because our main research subjects were close to this, because what we were researching was initiative budgeting. We understand, yes, this is one of the directions, and we are talking about an entire range of things, right? So it is very good, and you are doing a great job. You would do a great job if you would head this. Yeah, I'm sorry for interfering here and interrupting. No, don't worry. The interruption is well met. You have suggested a great working group that I think is going to do a great job if we find support for it. So you are completely correct. Yes, Alexander. Anna Belenchuk, I also would like to say a couple of words. I would like to first of all thank the organizers for a very broad agenda and for supporting the interest to this topic, despite its current pressingness has been shifted to the outskirts. It is, I think, important to not lose all the results that we have achieved throughout the years. We have made a difficult path in order to have these directions and routes established in terms of openness and working with the International Open Budgeting Partnership and with the Ministry of Finance and with the Moscow Institute of Finance and with the World Bank. And I only think such an organized expert community can suggest and propose something new and something specific for implementation and can become a positive engine for change and for the development of these directions. And we have to understand that the expert community has a completely different motivation that can become this very engine and this very driver. Now, in terms of organizing working groups and sections, I would like to support one of the colleagues who's spoken earlier. I'm ready to participate because I am continuing to research the topic of green budgeting as a new tool of openness in the budget, and perhaps a section on green budgeting is something that I'd be interested in participating in. I'm also ready to support the section on improving financial and budget literacy in general, if such section will be there. Okay, Anna, you are giving us two suggestions at once, because in terms of green budgeting, Margarita Zamyatina is an amazing scientific coordinator, and of course it is important for it to be done with a person who has a lot of energy just because he's younger and more full of energy, although Margarita Zamyatina still has a fire in her. But okay, sorry, I'm getting off track. The topic of education is very important, and we will not forget about it, and we will not definitely leave out the improvement of literacy, because this is something that we can't leave out, and maybe we will find a person who will be interested in the financial literacy section organization. Maybe there's somebody else, Natalia Germanova. It's interesting to talk about your application. Okay, I understand. That was a comment. Okay, Natalia, we will meet with you separately. I also wanted to meet you. So I'm happy that we are moving in the same direction. And that probably indicates that this direction is the right direction. I hope it, unless that's just a coincidence. And I'm just reacting to your comment, and I will get in touch with you. And now I'll just send you my email and my phone in order to maintain communication. Alexander Sengurov, if you want us to maintain the timetable, then I think it is time to slowly start getting into a conclusion. Okay, okay. Yes, I think it's time to pass the floor to you, to you, Vladimir. Yes, okay. One last thing that I'd like to say before I forget. Colleagues, we have indeed received the proposal for all the presentations to be published. Please do send them to the organizers, to Vagin and to his colleagues. Do it today or tomorrow so that we can collect your presentations and then use them collectively. Okay, Vladimir, I'm passing the word to you. Okay. Now, I want to give one comment regarding the projects of inclusivity and regarding the support of socially vulnerable groups. Of course, this is a truly noble task, and it is important, and it is timely. This is all indeed the case, especially given the fact that St. Petersburg is indeed setting an example of how we could have worked with these groups of citizens. But I would like to pay a special emphasis to the following, because from the very beginning, the entirety of our activity of initiative budgeting, it was different. It was very different from the activities of the non-commercial areas. And we by no means are planning to copy the activities of the commercial sector. And we're not going to try and help separate projects in their implementation. It's a good thing, but we think we will be more useful if we will be able to come up with an idea of a scaling option, of a government solution to these sort of projects, like the projects on inclusivity. And to all the people who want to work on these projects, I would advise them all to very seriously look at the opportunity at creating interaction and cooperation with the government entities that are currently involved with this. And first of all, with the Ministry of Social Support, and with your local one and with the federal one, because without their participation in this issue, I don't think that it's possible to do this at scale and systemically in terms of change. We are constantly going to be getting out bits and pieces here, a little project there, a little project here, but we're not going to achieve the things that we can achieve based on the experience that we have as enough today. And it's not the Ministry of Finance's job to organize this. Even though this is important, even though it's necessary, this is the task of other departments. And to get other departments and ministries involved into our work, that is our task, and that is our mission in this area. That is the kind of session we need in our upcoming conference, that would have the conference or the Ministry of the Social Support participate, so that they would hear the potential of our methodology. This is where our section is good. And it's not just us who need to be trying and getting other projects out, trying to help separate people. That is important. And now regarding the project in the ecology sphere, I think that a truly important task, and a task that is timely and that is needed. I mean, still, even today, even now, second year in a row, I'm saying that if some project is dedicated to ecology, if you have it in the regions, just tell about it to us. We are going to promote it. We're going to advertise it. We're going to set it as an example where we have real civic participation in the questions of ecology. Unfortunately, these projects are very far, few, and in between. I can't say that they're not there, but they're very limited. And we need special efforts in order to try and teach the people how we can see the ecological issues in their everyday life, because only then they will be ready to participate. I really loved the presentations from Anna Bilinchuk on green budgeting, and I was able to look at this entire topic from a different angle. I was truly imagining it differently, because I think that this topic contains a great potential. Great potential. If we are to truly implement this sort of technology in budgeting reform, if it is indeed soon going to become part of our political agenda on every level, this does have an enormous and even unlimited amount of work that could be done. That is, of course, also to do with a variety of options of citizen involvement and civil inclusion. And I am fully supportive of finding a place for this topic in our conference, because it could be super important. Now, I was writing down everything that you were talking about. and I was writing down all the topics that you were suggesting for various sections, both yesterday and today. And I already have an entire group of suggested sections. Now, first, for example, I would like to name the section that I would be organizing by myself. And even right now, I am urging you to participate in the preparation and development of the program of this session. Is going to be dedicated to the creation of the section of civic involvement. We're not only talking about the Russian Federation, we're talking about the development of methodology. We're talking about how can other countries also use the experience and use this methodology. And what is this? This is a section on methodology that I want to create, that I want to lead, and I'm going to prepare this section for our upcoming conference, for our forum. Now, I've also written down the section that Alexander Yurievich has talked about a number of times about the section on the efficacy of participation, because we talk a lot about participation, about getting the citizens involved, but we don't know how to measure it yet. We can measure the results, the quantifiable metrics. We even learned to measure the activity, but we're still not able to have impact evaluation on the participation of other sides. So regarding the traditional questions, in the very first day, I've been talking about them, about the questions of financial and budget literacy. And yes, I do agree with Alexander Yurich. We do have to find a place for them, but somehow they are very technological. Financial literacy, budget literacy. Why do people need it? And all this work is very operationalized. And I think that we need to find some different umbrella term for it, because I am constantly finding myself formulating about this topic in the terms of forming a culture, about forming a culture of civic participation. And in order for the formation of this culture, we need financial literacy, and not the culture in the broad sense of the word, not in terms of art, but in terms of a civil culture. And we can, within this culture, find a place for all the literacies that are necessary and the work that is necessary. So I would suggest a broader framework for this section, and to definitely include the questions on financial and budget literacy, but to start thinking about it in a broader sense. Of course, the tools for openness. Today, our work in our final section has shown a great interest and a great potential to this topic, and the presence of truly serious experts in the subject, both in the Russian Federation and not only in the Russian Federation. And we must definitely maintain, maybe modify it somewhat. I would definitely not want for the topic of open data to once again be lost in a very niche section where open data would be a thing of its own. I think that there is a strong reason for it to also get out into the open, be a more broad thing, because there are a lot of things that you can teach us. Ivan, Olga, you can teach us a lot. And every time you talk about this, I'm very interested, and I'm getting a lot of information from what you tell us, and I am for it, all for it. And as soon as the open government goes away, it was just left hanging. It was not passed on to another executive body. And our event today, it's, this is many years now that the open government is gone. It's the first time we have tried on an expert level about the things that don't go away, because the issues don't disappear. They don't disappear if we don't talk about them. And now on an expert community level, we start talking about them, and let us get this agenda out, and let us get this agenda in a broader spectrum of possible diversity, because I don't think that the open data needs to go into a narrow niche of open data and data analysis. And I think that if you're able to expand the borders of what you do, if you're able to attract more people into this discussion, you'll be able to get a number of experts on board. I would also suggest to think about one more section, and this is the section of electronic civil participation. I would just get a separate section for this, to work on it, to get a level of methodological suggestions in this area. Sure. And this is a topic that truly needs to be there. And one more topic, and I think a concluding topic, maybe it is not a topic for a separate section, maybe it's just a topic for a broader panel discussion, a discussion panel
on the potential of the topic of openness. Because we talked a lot about openness today, but what is going to happen to openness in the long run? Is it going to get digitalized? Is it going to stay in the direct participation of citizens, or is something else going to happen openly with openness? So I think this is a topic for discussion. And colleagues, I want to thank all of you very much. I have immensely enjoyed communicating and talking to all of you. There are a lot of new thoughts, new ideas, and I was able to speak about what I think, and I was able to get feedback. And I hope that you found this 2 days of work useful as well. Once again, thank you very much. Vladimir, and just a final thing, while you were talking about these very important moments, and also in terms of your understanding of how to work with vulnerable groups, I'd like to say that I fully agree. That is a technology we have to employ through the authorities, through the ministries. Over this time, we have Tatiana from Germany applying for the groups, understanding exactly what we're talking about. And the process is on its way. And I'd also like to say goodbye to everybody. It was an amazing experience working with you, working in a team, and I feel optimistic. Because we understand we have many negative factors, but a certain level of optimism is something that I want to close off with the words of Adam Michnik. It's a Polish journalist and a politician who presenting on our conference in 2017, he said, I'm not going to be talking about your problems. I'm going to be talking about the problems of Poland. He talked a lot about problems. And at the end, he said, I'm a moderate optimist. Why? Because I remember how in 89, I was part of the Polish Sejm, and I came to my good friend Václav Galmel, and he said, wow, in Poland, you have such charismatic people. We have held an election, and in the Soviet Union, everything's so complicated. It's perestroika, Gorbachev, but in Czechoslovakia, everything is so pointless. And Michnik said, well, Václav, what are you going to say if by the end of this year, you're going to become the president of your country? And he did, right? And on this great topic, on the topic of putting up openness on the flag, I'd say thank you and all the best. It was a pleasure working with you. Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. All the best. Bye.
Дорогая, мы попали вовремя, да, мы все сделали, молодцы.